Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari, and with me today is...
Garrett Eberhardt.
Not to be confused with Garrett Schellenhammer, who was on Incredibles 2. So Garrett, what movie are we going to overanalyze this week?
We are overanalyzing Sorry to Bother You.
So in an alternate present-day version of Oakland, telemarketer Cassius Green, played by Lakeith Stanfield, discovers a magical key to professional success, which propels him into a macabre universe of power calling that leads to material glory. But the upswing in Cassius's career raises serious red flags with his girlfriend Detroit, played by Tessa Thompson, a performance artist and minimum wage driver who's secretly part of a Banksy-style activist collective. And from there, the whole movie pretty much goes off the rails. We're going to spoil this for sure because it's impossible to talk about this movie without spoiling it. But somebody was like, well, what's it about? I'm like, some stuff happens and then everything just goes crazy. So what did you think?
I overall thought it was a pretty decent movie.
Okay.
It was fine. I think some of my expectations were colored by the hype it had coming out of the festival circuit.
Mm-hmm.
So that tempered my reaction to it when I first left the theater. But having some time to think on it, it was a pretty decent movie, pretty good. It's loaded with messages, though.
Yes.
It's about a lot of things.
We have a lot to unpack to get there. And honestly, there's so much to unpack, I feel like, cinematically before we even get to, all of the different themes and messages. So... we'll see what we can do. I loved it. This is totally my kind of movie. I love bonkers. Bonkers is totally for me. I love speculative fiction. I know you did a Q&A with the with Boots Riley, right? The director and writer. So I wanted to talk. I read a few reviews, and it's funny because everyone kept talking about Michel Gondry. And the homage to Michel Gondry. And I was like, all I can think of is Spike Jonze and being John Malkovich. Them in that telemarketing room just brought me back to those cubicles. So I thought, okay, I mean, I do think Michel Gondry was influenced by Spike Jonze as well, but I didn't catch all of those influences. Did you?
No, not immediately while watching it. Now that we're talking about it afterward, I could see some of those influences. But there were a lot of influences. For instance, at his Q&A, Boots Riley said was some of the production design. He specifically told the production designer, I can't remember what scene or set piece it was, but he said, I want it to be reminiscent of Suspiria. So he name dropped that specifically during his Q&A. So there are a lot of different homages, I think, in there, where he's just pulling from everything from that he's a fan of, since it's his first film.
Yeah. Yeah, so he has a musical background, and I have to say this, I loved the soundtrack. I loved it. I thought it just enhanced the movie in just the right way without, again, substituting for emotions I was supposed to feel. I thought it was fun and upbeat, and I was kind of grooving to it and enjoying the movie. I think this is the first movie in a while that I can remember where I was just really, really, really liked the soundtrack.
Okay, so during the Q&A, he also dropped a tidbit that his group, The Coup, which is what he's known for in the Bay Area, underground rap group, but pretty notable. They did the organic music that the characters were listening to in the film, and then the actual score, the music that played during the film, was another composer. Yeah. That was something cool that I really didn't notice. But they did the entire soundtrack to his group.
Yeah, I mean, it integrated really well. I felt like it was there were songs playing, but then the soundtrack, it all fit the same tone, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's there's a song that's really prevalent in a movie. People are sitting in a car and the song comes on, but then the rest of the soundtrack is more classical or something. So all of it just sort of integrated really well, and a sonic soundscape, which I really had fun with. Again, because I'm this movie is bonkers. I was so happy. I'm I've not seen a crazy town piece of art in a long time. Performances. So I will admit that I was sitting there and listening to his coworkers. So one of the themes we're going to have to get into, and one of the main pieces of the movie is code switching. Mm-hmm. So Cassius is working as a telemarketer, and Danny Glover, in an excellent, like, small role, says to him at one point, like, if you want to sell anything, you're going to have to use your white voice. And then the white voices are literally white voices. They're, like, dubbed actors. And one of the, like, elite power callers, his white voice, I was like, I know who it is. I recognize that voice. And I spent, like, a good, I don't know, almost the entire movie just, like, obsessing about. And I was like, it's somebody, like, it's an actor. He's a little bit older. He's kind of short and chubby. And I'm like, but it's not Wallace Shawn. I know it's not Wallace Shawn. Like, the first thing I did when the, like, house lights came up was IMDb, like, or no, I sat through the credits because I was like, who the heck was that voice? And it was Patton Oswalt. And I was like, I was so close. I feel like I was close.
Yeah, I was hoping you would mention that because that seems to be an insane skill you have where you just recognize these actors' voices. I had no clue that these were done by famous people until the credits. So it said Cassius's white voice, Patton Oswalt, and then...
No, the other guy's white voice was Patton Oswalt. Cassius's was David Cross.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering which was which. And then Tessa Thompson's was...
Lily James.
Yeah, Lily James, which I didn't hear... when she was doing it, I didn't hear Lily James.
I was a little bit stumped when she did hers if it wasn't just Tessa Thompson doing an English accent, actually. They sounded similar enough. Like, there wasn't as quite a big a disconnect. So I thought the voice actors did a great job. I thought the actual actors did a really good job. I didn't love... So I've seen Lakeith Stanfield in a few things. So I know that his sort of sad sack demeanor was, like, the direction and not him. But it kind of got on my nerves.
Okay. I really liked him and Thompson and Steve Ewan. Those three were the top performers to me, I thought, because they did the absurdist humor well, particularly Lakeith Stanfield. That seems like a lot of his personality. And then they did the heavy drama stuff well, too. So they were able to maneuver between those two different tones and make it believable and didn't take you out one way or the other, whichever direction they went into, which would have been easy with this film. But they avoided it. So those were my top three performing.
Okay. Yeah, I thought the movie was funny. Like, I did laugh. And I would shout out to Armie Hammer. Like, what a random thing for him to be in this movie. Good for him for taking on, like, a fun indie role just to do it, right? And I thought he did a really good job.
Yeah, and behind the scenes stuff, more from Boots' Q&A. So he was talking about how wonderful it was to work with the directors and talked about the casting process. And with Armie Hammer, he mentioned that at the time he was doing European promo for Cars 2, I think. And so, all the actors, I think they were paid like scale to do this.
I'm sure.
And so while he was doing the European promo, he made Pixar pay for a flight so they could come back and like do table reads and stuff like that for Sorry to Bother You. So Boots said he really respected and appreciated that Armie, used his bargaining power to force Pixar to use those Pixar dollars in order to fly him out so he could do work on, this little indie movie. So that was a cool tidbit since you're bringing up Armie Hammer. I thought I'd mention that too.
Yeah, good for you, Armie Hammer. There was also some... So I said the soundtrack. Like, the soundtrack really stuck out to me. I really liked the crazy editing, and I liked that one montage that was like a kind of a stop motion scene as he's like getting as he's moving up in the company and like experiencing his wealth for the first time. And you see the again, you go through a montage of him going to work and his lifestyle changing. And they did it like a fake stop motion where they sort of stuttered it. And I thought, all right, you added something new to just a basic montage. So I appreciated that. I think that's what the Michel Gondry shout out everybody thought. So there was just, there were so many different sort of styles and things happening in the movie that it got a little bit, I could see how it would be a little bit much for some people, but I have a short attention span, so the more stuff you throw at me, I'm like, yay! Anything else praiseworthy?
I I think that covers the gist of it outside of the themes and everything. Yeah, it was pretty well shot. It had a very Oakland feel.
Yes.
That's an homage to where Boots is from. And there was some little small like Oakland hip hop cameos. So famous rapper from Oakland named Mr. Fab, he made a cameo where he was in the car and he threw something at Cassius after Cassius got famous for having the Coke can thrown in his face. So there were little tidbits that, really made it have a local feel.
Yeah.
Oakland feel. So that was cool.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I did want to say that. Like, it definitely walked that line between, portraying Oakland, portraying, like a kind of working class neighborhood or some of the shadier neighborhoods with, where they were hanging out, dive bars and his like sort of ratty car. But there was a love and a care that was present in those scenes. Like, it was sort of shot in the best light. It wasn't made to look like, oh, this is hard and gritty and Oakland is the worst, it's the hood, There was I felt like a joy and a celebration of Oakland to the cinematography rather than trying to make it look terrible. Look real. I mean, it didn't, again, you were in a sketchy neighborhood. But I really appreciated that. Because I feel like Oakland, it's like Oakland, Detroit, and Newark. Yeah. They get a real bad rap.
Right.
Mind you, I've never been to Newark or Oakland. But I'm sure they're not that bad. Right. So this was definitely like a first-time writer, director. It had real pacing problems. Even for me, about 2/3 of the way in, I guess in a sort of 3-act structure, as we were heading into the 3rd act, I was kind of like, first of all, I don't know where this is going or how you're going to resolve it. You've started so many threads and like thrown so many things out there. How are you going to get it all resolved in this 3rd act? And it was not. So I definitely wouldn't say that this was a perfect movie. Like, there were some really glaring flaws in the writing in terms of how to resolve all of these things and make some really cogent points about them.
Mm-hmm. So what to you was unresolved? And follow-up question, were those things unresolved because that was part of the message? Like, he's leaving it unresolved because in real life that actual issue was unresolved and ongoing?
The organizing plotline and the union didn't really resolve to anything. Okay. The worry-free, like, where we were all going with that, like, what was going to happen to the already human workers? Were they all going to get turned into horses? Like, that didn't really get resolved. I guess it was a little bit of a, I think part of the issue was the world building wasn't quite cohesive enough. So it was the step out of our world into this alternate universe. I don't feel like he thought through every single aspect of how Worry-Free came to be, what it was going to do, what its call centers were about. Like, all of that world building should have been cohesive, and then the resolution would have been obvious, because if you had resolved one thing aspect of it, it would have flowed through the rest of the organization. But it just seemed like a kind of random hodgepodge. And it was like, oh, it does this, and then they have sleeves, but then people sleep on cots and make commercials. What was the TV show? The TV show that they're on? I got this stuff kicked out of me to keep this family friendly.
I think that was just included as commentary on just reality show culture and the coarseness of entertainment, and how, everything's gotten just so, I guess, ridiculous and exploitative. So that's what I took the show as. That was just one more piece of social commentary in a movie that was just packed with social commentary. Right,
but then my complaint is it doesn't link to the other pieces very well. Again, why would this alternate world, where we still somehow have union organizers and protesters, but then we also have this show, like, it didn't all hang together, and it was moving in a very kind of crazy pace towards, again, a resolution that didn't really come.
Well, how far are we off from having a show like I got the S kicked out of me? Like, there's some shows that aren't that
here
far
in
out.
America or in Japan?
That's true.
And their crazy game show culture. Like that, if it were Japanese, that would have sold it for me, actually. That would have been like, yes, imported from Tokyo. Totally there.
No, but even America, where there are some exploitative shows, but they're not as over the top or direct as that, but like where you feel like, why are we putting this on TV? Like, so it's not that outlandish that there would be a universe where you still have the union organizing, but you have this show where you're like, are they really putting this on TV and like consuming this as entertainment? I mean, when we have stuff like My 600-Pound Life, or I'm trying to think of some other ones. Stuff like that.
But then that's where he gets it wrong. So yeah, thinking about that and The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, and I did see a season of Unreal, which was, based on someone who used to be a producer on The Bachelorette. Like, but it's not like blatantly like we're just going to be terrible to people. That's what makes it problematic, is that it's exploitative in a much more subtle and much more mess with your mind kind of way, in a way where you get sucked into the drama. And so you end up turning off the part of your brain that says, hang on now, wait a minute. Like, what are we actually doing to these people? Like, I haven't seen My 600-Pound Life, but I'm sure it's filmed very sympathetically to that person so that you don't have to feel like a terrible person, as opposed to just the blatant, like, we're just going to watch someone get beat up. Like, that's not how our media is fed to us. It's fed to us so we don't have to feel like terrible people for watching it, even though we actually are.
What about Cops? A lot of people would say, like, maybe that's something closer to, I just got the S kicked out of me.
I guess I'm saying, like, it wasn't a perfect movie. Like, and I did see, like, a kind of one bad review, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, your mileage is going to vary on this. Like, if you have really high expectations, it's not going to meet them because it just doesn't all fold together. But at the same time, if you're just sort of like, I'm in it for the ride, which is where I was at, I was like, I don't care. Like, right. I'm having fun. Like, I thought it was just so creative and bonkers. And I just, like I said, it just pushed every button that it needed to push for me. So I was like, I see the flaws because, you have your critic's hat on when you're watching it, but I wasn't tripped up by them, I guess I would say.
Okay.
Also because half my brain was like, whose voice is that?
Right.
This is making me crazy. But yeah. All right. So what was this movie about?
Oh, man. So the biggest things, so outside of the criticism of sort of like late stage capitalism and capitalism in general, like a subset of that was class solidarity. And then you had the criticism of sort of like we were talking about with the coarsening of the culture through entertainment and like social media and going viral, stuff like that. And then the second biggest one was obviously all the commentary on race, whether it was code switching or about trying to be successful in corporate America as a minority, all that stuff.
Yeah, so for me, like, I'm so excited that this was what this movie was about, because I have been waiting 2 years of this podcast to talk labor rights. So my first real job out of college, I worked in socially responsible investing, and I worked on labor issues. And my supervisor, was the Steve Yeun character. She came out of, and she was an organizer. She worked her way up through unions. She worked in the ILO. Like, she had 20 years of organizing experience when I got there, and she was a wonderful mentor. And I'm just like, I've been waiting to be like, yes, pro-union, let's talk about organizing. Like, and actually having a character who's a union organizer, and sort of, you give there's a moment in the film where, she's kind of asking him, like, is this what you do? Like, you go into a workplace and you start talking to people and you organize, and then you're done and you have to move on to the next job. And you're like, yeah, that's what a union organizer does. I don't think a lot of people know that job exists. Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of people really understand how places get unionized. So I couldn't have been, like, more excited to see it on the film. And I also thought it was interesting. So the movie talks in very, I actually would say, unique ways about race. And I thought it was interesting from a pure casting choice to pick Steve Yeun, the character Squeeze, as the union organizer. Because I thought, they easily could have made a sort of model minority story out of him being Asian American, and they didn't. They gave him solidarity with everybody else, and I really appreciated that character in particular. They chose an Asian actor to play him. Like, I thought, great, show everybody really is in the same boat. There isn't a model minority. There isn't someone who somehow escapes.
And that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. So now, just like going off of that point because it's so good, how much do you think that's attributable to it being on the West Coast and having such a large populace of people of Asian descent, so you get a little bit of everything, where you're in locales where you may not necessarily have a lot of Asian representation, so it could skew more to the quote-unquote model minority, but being in the Bay Area, being actually, around poor Asians, which isn't the archetype that's put forth in American media. And do you think that really informed Boots Riley's choice, where he's in an environment where he's been around that type of Asian person, so it didn't occur to him that I'm breaking a model minority stereotype as opposed to someone like me from the Midwest or maybe even an East Coast person?
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I thought. I thought, hey, this is filmed in Oakland. Like, you should totally have an Asian character here. Like, that is what the Bay Area is like. I did take it to mean like that was his kind of California coming through, having that character. And I think you're totally right. Like, that model minority stereotype, like, it works sometimes. And there was a good article, I'll see if I can dig it up for the show notes, about how how the model minority cuts against people sometimes. Just the image of, like, we then think of, like, Asians as, like, these robots with no emotions who are good at, like, playing the violin and getting into Harvard, right? And we don't see them as sort of fully realized people. But aside from that, it's like, okay, the model minority and the sort of more well-off, like, Asia's a continent. There's all kinds of Asians. Like, there are a lot of, like, super poor Vietnamese people and very wealthy Korean people. Like, it's not a monolith either. And I think you're right. I think the idea of, like, the real working class Chinese family in the Bay Area is a lot more relevant to somebody from Oakland than it's going to be to people from other parts of the country. And I think the movie did make a very nuanced and what's the word I'm looking for? I think the movie was careful in its treatment of Cassius. Like, him being a scab stunk, and his girlfriend was completely right to break up with him. I would have broken up with him too. But at the same time, like, it's hard to criticize him for doing it. How did you feel about him going against the union and breaking the picket line? Scab.
Yeah, so I think that really got into its examination of class solidarity. And they did a good job of setting up the circumstances in Cassius's life that would lead him to make that decision. So, whether it was his just general aspirations about wanting to feel appreciated and recognized for having a substantive profession. That, was one of the first things we saw from him when he and Detroit were in bed at the beginning of the movie, and he was, wishing for something more. And then on top of that, you had his financial situation and his uncle's financial situation where he was going to get foreclosed on. So they did a good job of showing that the struggle that people have in trying to, on the one hand, be sympathetic to the perils of capitalism and how it just grinds up workers and exploits them, but you still live in a capitalist country where money is important. It's a hard thing to avoid falling in that trap.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And I think, again, it's not a choice I hope I would have made, but if I did make it, it was hard to feel moral censure for him finally having a chance at a better life and then saying, no, I'm going to turn it all down because I'm going to stand on a picket line and make no money because we're on strike, right? And hope that this all works out. And I think, that is unfortunately how union busting works. Sometimes, like, it does definitely try to pick off people that they think are going to be leaders and raise them above. So then they are less supportive of the union, like the people who are well connected. But also, I think we're not good at solidarity in America. It's not our thing. We're all about rugged individualism.
Right.
Like, how they, how unions came about and how were so easily destroyed, starting with basically, kind of the big bellwether moment, Reagan in the 80s was like equating it to communism and just saying these like worker solidarity, that's that's Russian. Like, that's not what America's about. America's about you earning no money and like handing money over to the capitalists. And it's like, I think I've heard so many people, you hear, and it makes me crazy that I've heard so many people blame the unions for why our car companies for American car companies decline. Well, the unions, I was like, there were two people in that negotiating table. If management was so short-sighted that they gave too many concessions to the union, ultimately they're the ones running the business. Like, it's always going to be their fault. What is wrong in your head that you're even thinking that it could be the union? And sure, there are definitely problems with solidarity in terms of covering up and protecting bad workers. Like, that does happen. It's not a perfect system, but you're like, it really has, like, how can you conceive in your head? And I'm an economist. Like, I'm like, unions are exactly the free market at work. Of saying, like, collective action to give us equal bargaining power is exactly how economics works. It's how capitalism works. Unions are the most capitalist thing you can do. Trying to equate it with some, like, foreign communist, like, Marxist, it's like, no, it doesn't make any sense for me to bargain individually with a group of people who are basically trying to pay me as little as possible and get as much value out of me. Like, and if I'm an economist and think, okay, that is their raison d'etre, fine. But I've got to have a bulwark against it. And then you hear all the people who complain about, all those good car manufacturing jobs are gone. Like, honestly, you couldn't run in Michigan when I lived there. Like, you had to promise manufacturing jobs were coming back when John McCain campaigned and he was like, dude, those jobs aren't coming back. Like, he was booed. Everybody hated him. And you're like, those jobs were good because of the UAW. You sold away your labor rights. That's why there aren't any good jobs anymore. Like, you made that choice. You voted for right to work states. You handed all of your power away. And now somehow you're sad it's gone and you can't make the connection between why it's gone. In summary, rise up, people. The Supreme Court just dealt us a pretty big blow with Janus. But unions work.
They do. But, like you said, Reagan happened.
Yeah.
And even he was turned against unions by his, first father-in-law, who, worked for GM. That's where Reagan got switched to conservatism. He put the bug in his ear and switched him around. I can't remember the guy's name. He was a exec, and he got Reagan to turn away from unions because Reagan was a union president of SAG.
That's right. Oh, the hypocrisy. And I think but that's, to me, that what makes me crazy. Like I said, I am an economist, and people talk about capitalism, and unions absolutely fit into every model of free market capitalism. Unions make sense. They're a natural free market solution to the corporate structure. Like, the idea that, like, being conservative and understanding economics means you're anti-union, you're like, that doesn't actually make any sense. It's not how economic theory works. I'm here to inform everybody. So I just again, just having a movie about unions and about worker rights and showing picket lines and calling people out of scabs, like, I couldn't have been more delighted. I was like, finally, I can have the pro-union rant of all time, which I just gave you. Thank you very much. And so then getting into the sort of the second big theme of code switching.
Yeah, and that really played into. So it's the way the movie worked, and what Boots Riley did a good job of was showing, I guess, how race also affects this class solidarity issue, because you had the issue where Cassius felt responsible for saving his uncle's foreclosed home, and so that drove a lot of his decision making as far as climbing the corporate ladder. And that's something unique that I think minorities deal with in their job travails, which is once you make it and you reach a certain level, you're partly expected to bring everyone else up with you that surrounds you. So whether it's family or friends, you're the one that made it, so you have to ensure that they're okay too. And that's an added pressure that Cassius was feeling that was unique to him as a black man. And I think that came across. This is how
athletes end up broke.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is how 40% of NBA players are bankrupt after 5 years. It's like a ridiculous statistic.
Right, because you get your mom a house, and then everyone, you got your cousins, and they have an idea for this cool restaurant or bar, and the next thing you know, you don't have any money, and that's an added pressure that I thought came across well in here, that was unique to Cassius and why he felt he had to cross that picket line and go up. And then once he was there, you talk about code switching, which is a good look at how minorities, particularly black people, really have to navigate living in America, which is, such a violently racist country, and having to get across how non-threatening you are, I guess, in order to really succeed in America. So that was, something that isn't really explored on film a lot, that was done well here.
Well, they give him the double whammy, which I thought was interesting in terms of they literally present his ticket to success as acting white, right? In the most literal of terms, by having a white actor be what he has, to employ to start being able to be a successful telemarketer. But then, later in the film, he's at this party, and now everyone is like, okay, we know you're doing that for work. We need you to code switch back and be black for us, but black for us in the way we think black people should be. And they make him do, a rap. And he's like, I don't know how to rap. I can't do this. And he's terrible at it. And then he just starts screaming the N-word. And then all the white people are screaming the N-word. And I'm like, this is really uncomfortable.
And that was a commentary, I guess, calling on Boots' musical background, that was, a statement on modern rap and popular music and what it takes to succeed in that realm. So I caught that message too. When to give background on what happened in the movie, he can't rap, and so he tries to do these 80s Run DMC, AB rhyme schemes, and they're just staring at him. So then he does the N-word chant, and then that's when he gets them on their side. So that was a commentary on rap's content and its popularity and why it's so popular and mainstream now, which was a criticism of modern rap music. So I caught that as well. That was another message in the film. Yeah,
and I think, and so, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is something where when you talk about why I personally hate the term African American, because I don't know what that means, because being an immigrant black person is very different than being a black person from the legacy of slavery in America. And the immigrant people that I've known, either West Indian or from Africa, will talk about how, I had a good friend in college, and she was like, I can't code switch. My parents told me to speak proper. I don't know how to not speak proper. This is who I am. Mm-hmm. She's like, I just don't do it. I don't know how. Mm-hmm. I think the idea of code switching and the whole idea of, black culture in America is based on that tradition. And so it's not even universal, I don't feel like, among every person of African descent, in America. It's such a uniquely black American thing to have the code switch, to be accused of acting white when you speak a certain way, or you choose to be in certain environments, and to have to move between those two worlds. And so I thought the movie did a really good job of kind of how, I think through the Tessa Thompson character, through the Detroit, the girlfriend character, of how even she is so like hardcore. She breaks up with him for being a scab. You know, she has these social protest earrings that she makes. She's this performance artist, but when she gets up to do her performance art, again, she code switched to an English accent for whatever bizarre reason. She doesn't even, she feels like she's in an art gallery, white world. She's in a white space, and she has to switch.
Yeah, and you're correct. It is something that's unique to Black American culture. And why that is, I don't know. That's a very long and complicated answer. I mean, part of it is just for survival, really. And, you know, going back to the antebellum South and to the Jim Crow South, to where, you know, you could be killed as a Black person if you didn't mind your words to the white person that you're talking to. So, you know, speaking in correct terms around white people for, you know, over a century really was a matter of life and death, literally, for Black people. And so, you know, it could arise out of that. And then, again, being in these spaces where your advancement is really predicated on how comfortable people are around you. I mean, and just in general, advancing in the workplace is about, you know, how well you're liked and how well you get along with people. And when you come into that equation with one mark already against you, which is your skin color, you can't afford to have any other marks against you. So you have to go the extra mile in order to create a more palatable image for yourself. And so that plays into it as well. What is considered, you know, professional and proper conduct in the workplace. And that's something that you really have to be mindful of as well.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things the movie really actually shows you, which is something I related to personally, is that it's a skill. Mm-hmm. Code switching is a skill. And so I admittedly code switch. Anybody who's followed me on this podcast can probably notice how my speech patterns change depending on even who the co-host is. Mm-hmm. My work study job in college was ironically for the Center for the Study of the American South. Yankee New Yorker that I am, that was my job. I'm telling you, for years afterwards, my professional phone voice had a Southern accent. And people were like, why did you just switch to the Southern accent when you picked up the phone? But it was so unconscious. Like, it was so like, I'm in a Southern place, I have to fit in, and I code switch Southern. And I like that they show that the advancement he gets is because he is that good at, you know, acting white, and that it's a skill that he's somewhat proud of, but then it starts to take over his life and he doesn't know who the real Cassius, like he starts slipping into it in moments when he's not at work, and people are like, why are you talking like that? But I thought, you know, that's something that's not always understood about code switching. Everybody acts like, you know, like everyone can do it, and it's not true. And that your advancement is often dependent on you being able to have that as a skill. Right. Yeah, that's very true. Very well put. Again, I really respected how interesting the movie put together the intersection of those two ideals. Like the capitalism and the code switching, and then what it takes to get ahead. Does it make you a bad person? And then also just talking about, like you said, where you start to lose a part of yourself and the pursuit of these things, and, you know, whether that's worth it at all. And then until you literally lose yourself entirely and become a horse. Oh my God. But I appreciate it. So the movie is crazy, like you said, but I appreciated using the absurdist satire and humor in order to get across points. So I thought that was well done in the movie. So the horse plot where he's taking these slaves at Worry Free and turning them into horses, and how you take human equisapiens, which was brilliant, well played. use of words.
And so they're half human, half horse. And, it's well done where you take this absurdist notion of turning a worker into a half horse so they can work harder as a statement on how, late stage capitalism is just consuming more and more of workers' rights and just really grinding people. And, you have 50, 60-hour work weeks for, pay that has been stagnant for 30 years. And it's a commentary like, hey, we are being slaves. And if it keeps going on this path, we're going to end up becoming like basically horses where this company owns us and we're returning to company towns where people live on the company's property and you sleep there, immediately go to work and go back, down the block to your company house and wake up and do it all over again for little pay.
Yeah, that's the part of the movie that I actually thought I don't agree with anything about what that represented, to be honest. I don't think they're going to turn us into horses. I think they're going to fire us all and hire robots. So I do think...
that is more likely, yes.
I do. So what's interesting to me is I remember having a conversation with somebody about, there's a lot of science fiction about, and even Star Trek, Next Generation kind of delves into like what happens when no one has to work anymore. Mm. What does society become? And there's a lot of science fiction about, what happens when, we barely need human labor. What does everybody do with their time? Like, you can't just do nothing. Although, like, WALL-E sort of gives you that future. And I was talking to a coworker who's a lawyer, and I was like, but don't you think that, like, we're already there? Like, I'm an economist. I don't add any real value to society. Like, I'll be completely clear. Like, I make a ridiculous salary for what my my economist brain productive value is. I'm like, they've invented my job to give me something to do and to pay me money. Like, we're all working fake jobs, people. Like, there's nobody who does like real productive things in this economy. And the ones who do, unfortunately, are the ones who are sort of treated the worst and paid the worst. And the rest of, like us, if you've made it into the elite level, like you're working a fake job with no value and getting paid for it. And we've all just sort of agreed that we're going to pretend that this has value.
Except for doctors.
I'm going to disagree with you there.
Oh, really?
Sorry, I really hate doctors. They're right up there with the police for me. Because this podcast is going to run long anyway. When we'll do a good doctor movie and we'll get to hear finally Nicole's rant against why doctors are useless. But yeah, I actually thought the whole like Equisapiens thing was kind of a fun, absurd thing, and I went along for the ride, but the social commentary, I sort of was left feeling like, this isn't the way we're going. They're going to kill us all and replace us with robots. Like, they're not going to, like, downgrade us to horses or upgrade us, depending on how big you think your schlong is. She's like, I could have just had you look at the nostrils. But again, whatever, like, it was fun to watch. Like, it didn't really bother me in the moment, but as the sort of social commentary.
Yeah, I think that our future is in automation, so you're correct there. Yeah, that's true.
And I think also, like, they didn't necessarily, I mean, in terms of late-stage capitalism, are we really better off without the company town?
You don't think so? I thought company towns were pretty much accepted as being, like, extremely exploitative of workers and just like indicative of like the old robber baron age. You think
so? Is it better to try to live in DC in a little tiny apartment that you can't afford, or have to live 2 hours away to commute to get to your job to earn not enough money to pay for anything? Like,
I mean, there has to be a happy medium between.
I don't think we should have either choice, but I guess I would question, like, is being a minimum wage worker without a company town?
Yeah, to me, it's a little too close to being like company property. Like, oh, spend every waking hour working for us, then go to your company-owned living domicile, and then eat from our cafeterias and eventually going to have Google bucks. Like, no, I think I wouldn't want to go back to that. I like where we are now.
Okay.
Just need to be.
Now I feel like I'm advocating for communism all of a sudden, where I'm like, no, really, benevolent dictator is a way better way to go. Like, they're both terrible, but I guess I'm saying, like, this is what we've decided. We've decided to just throw everybody to the wolves, and it's sink or swim. And if you have a special quality, like you're really good at code switching or whatever, like maybe you'll be the exception that pulls themselves out. But either way, like you can choose to do worry-free, you can choose to go live in the company town, or you can choose to struggle and have a sense of personal freedom. Both ways you lose. Either way, the capitalist wins, right? The owner, the boss wins.
But between those two choices, yes. But like, yeah, I just think it's totally the wrong message. Like, Americans are too in love with work in the first place and spend too much time there. So like, you see us sort of going back as we enter into a new robber baron age where, you have these super campuses that particularly the tech companies are really pushing. So you're like, oh, Google, we have a gym on campus and a daycare and all this stuff to just basically rope you into spending every waking hour at work. And it's like, no, Americans need less time at work. Like, we take no vacation. We don't have any, like, family leave, paternal or maternal. Like, no, don't make more things to make your workplace seem cool when it's really, no, you're just trying to keep me here for longer. Like, oh, you don't have to leave. We have this gorgeous cafeteria, the Google cafeteria, and a gym here and a shower. Why are you leaving? Just stay here for 12 hours and then you can go to your company town apartment right after. So now you can work 15-hour days. Like, no, it's a trap. That's why
it's a trap. I agree. I had a boss literally, like, we had this really nice espresso machine in the break room. It's like, I bought it so you guys wouldn't go to Starbucks.
Right.
I was pretty honest. Yeah, no, and the movie doesn't go into it, but like you're sort of bringing up two fundamental aspects that become really problematic. Either over-identifying yourself with your career, which I'm just as guilty of. Like, how many times in this podcast have I said I'm an economist already, right? Like, I'm very identified with being an economist as my career and as my personality. But then in absence of having that career to identify with, you get too invested in being a Google employee and like thinking Google is the coolest and all of that. And it's like, maybe just be a person, like go to so that was the one thing too they always do, and this always drives me crazy when they do it. They do it a lot on TV shows. There's always a character who's like, this isn't a workplace, it's a family. Yes. F that. This is not a family. This is a business relationship. Right. Like, this is an economic transaction. I provide you labor, you pay me for that labor. Like, you're not a family. I don't know your loyalty. Like, what a freaking trap. And it's like I said, it's so endemic in popular culture. And you're like, people get really sucked into these like plot lines. And I'm like, y'all, this is a job. And you need to go home from this job and have your real life. Like, so, yeah. I could go on and on and on forever on this topic, clearly, but I will wrap things up, give you a chance to give a social impact score for Sorry to Bother You.
I'm going to say it will be maybe a 4.
Okay.
It's not it'll be on wide release by the time this podcast comes out, but as of recording, it won't be nationwide until Friday.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how popular it's going to get that would allow it to have a big social impact score. But it could lead to bigger things for Boots Riley, and you don't know what else he'll make in the future. So that gives it a chance. I'm going to go bold. I'm going bold. I don't normally do this on the social impact score. I'm giving it a 7 for 2 reasons. One, I think this is going to launch Boots Riley. Okay. Like, this was a first endeavor. It wasn't perfect. Nobody's first movie is, pretty much. Like, I think he will get, tighten up his game, get more restrained, be able to focus, like, and really, his sophomore effort will be a lot better. I think this is going to put him on a map. And also, like, I think this is going to lead to a change. I think we're going to see more things like Sorry to Bother You. I think it's going to become a cult hit. And I think it's going to open the door for different kinds of directors and different kind of stories. That's bold. I mean, it just depends on how much traction it gets. All right. Beyond this, tell me something I should see, read, hear. What are your recommendations for the episode? A movie that should be out on Blu-ray by the time this podcast drops, and is already available for streaming on platforms like iTunes and Amazon. You Were Never Really Here, starring Joaquin Phoenix, directed by Lynn Ramsey, who also did We Should Talk About Kevin. And it's sort of a New Millennium like Taxi Driver, sort of, I guess is a crude analogy. But it was pretty good, and I wrote it up. It's on Cinema Babble and also LeonardMaltin.com. I was able to write a piece for them, and I wrote about You Were Never Really Here. So that's my recommendation for the month.
Okay. I'm going to recommend a shout-out that was in the movie itself. I believe this is what she won her Oscar for in her famous You Like Me, You Really Like Me speech. If you haven't seen Norma Rae, the Sally Field, see it. It's great. All right. On that note, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Movies That Matter. Take a second to leave a review. Please, please, please. It's my birthday this week. Wish me a happy birthday with an iTunes review. Check out our website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. Check out Garrett's website,
cinemababble.com.
Leave a comment on our Facebook page or on Twitter with our tag @MoviesMatterPod, or for Cinema Babble with
The Cinema Babble on Twitter.
And check Twitter. So every on our off Thursdays when we don't post an episode, I will tell you what movie you should be seeing that weekend, so you know how to be ready for our next Movies That Matter episode. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.